I'm Dee Dee Walsh, and I worked at Microsoft from 1991 to 2012, greatest years of my life, because I worked in developer tools primarily. I'm one of the few locals at Microsoft who got hired. And in fact, when I got hired to Microsoft, it actually made the Seattle Times because Microsoft hired so few locals that they had this little funny tech gossip column back in the day. I can't remember the guy who wrote it, but I even, I wasn't really that well known, but I made it that column because it was so rare that Microsoft hired a local. So I grew up in Bellevue, Washington, went to Newport High, and came to Microsoft. So when I started out on the Visual Basic product, I got hired to do PR for it. I was, someone who was reasonably technical. I'd been in the industry for many years, and I had really tight relationships with the press. So Microsoft wanted me to bring that to them. In fact, so Microsoft was kind of the big company, and I was a little scared of it. And we liked to make fun of it because it was a big company. Of course, you make fun of it. I worked for a small company called Buttonware, and it was the first shareware company. And I got to do a bunch of different things at Buttonware. I got to do support and all of the fun, that was kind of my start, was doing product support and helping to even design the product and write the documentation, like go through the whole life cycle. And what was cool about Buttonware was we were right in the heart of the industry. It was a very small industry back then. I worked there starting in 1985. And there were so few software companies around, and we were like this small community, and we kind of all did stuff together. There was like HDC, and there were, other traveling software, and we all would get together and learn from each other. Even if we were competing with each other, we still were friends, frenemies, and would learn from each other. And of course, the Microsoft people were sort of in that mix as well. And around 1991-ish, I met this guy, Tom Button, who was putting out doing a new developer tool. And it was a product at the time called Thunder, if you're familiar with the Visual Basic code name at the time. And it made it so that you could draw the screen and then write code behind it. It was revolutionary. There was nothing like it. And the first time I played around with it, I was blown away. I couldn't believe that anything could make programming this easy. And so I think I kind of had a love affair with this product. I'd just never seen anything like it. And so before that, Microsoft, I had spoken with Microsoft several times, and I'd gotten an offer from Microsoft, and it turned Microsoft down, I think, twice maybe, because it was just too big. But when I saw Visual Basic, I fell in love, and that I had to come over. Who wouldn't want to be a Visual Basic product manager? Visual Basic was a jumpstart for programming. In many ways, it was sort of like the great equalizer in the industry. In my opinion, Visual Basic is what made Windows so popular and an industry revolution, because anybody could create software. Before Visual Basic came along, you had to be an engineer, and you probably worked for a software company, and you were a brainiac, and you had a computer science degree. And what Visual Basic made possible was that really, literally, anybody could write programs. And so people in companies were they realized, wow, I can write productivity software specific to my company. And so there were all these products being made for specific companies that enhanced the workflow of that company. It was revolutionary. It revolutionized everything about the industry because anybody could write software. Anybody could make it so that your company ran better, more efficiently. You had a competitive advantage over everyone else because you were writing specific IP for your company that no one else could copy. Working at Microsoft was so much fun, especially on the road, because especially at that time, we were hot. Everybody wanted to be a degree of either directly connected to Microsoft or some degree of separation. And so it was so fun because everything we touched was just magic. And so I did a lot of shows and I did a lot of traveling for Microsoft, and I got to write the demos, which for me is super fun to get to write the demos and show how to use the products. And one fun thing about traveling for Microsoft was I was one of few women. And it was kind of a novelty because there were so few women. One sort of funny story was at the time that I started with Microsoft, the company would only order shirts in men's sizes. And I'm 5 feet tall and I, wore a size small. So even a men's size small shirt, went down past my knees. It was total dress. And I just hated it. I felt like a dork. And so I went to the company store, because that's where you had to get your show shirt, and said, can't we get some women's shirts? And they said, no. No, there's no demand for it. So I wrote into the Micro News. Does everybody remember the Micro News? It was our company newsletter. And I said, this is embarrassing. I hate showing up to a show and dressed like a man at every show. And it was funny because across the company, so many men wrote in and were like, this is unfair. We need shirts for women. So that was the catalyst for us getting women's size shirts. I never felt discriminated against or felt like they were mansplaining or talking down to me, because we were all having so much fun, and everybody had this huge love of technology. In fact, that was like the main hiring criteria at the time, was passion for technology. And we all shared that. And so it was just such a vibrant, chaotic environment that I never felt that way, like that, oh, I'm the only woman in the room. I felt like, for lack of a better way of saying it, like one of the guys, but I think they just as much felt like they were one of the girls. It was just, we weren't thinking about that. We were just thinking about our love of technology and our desire to change the world. At the time, a computer in every desktop and in every home was crazy. Like it sounded like something, would it even happen in our lifetimes? We weren't sure that it would. And so what was so great about it was that every product could dock to that. And in particular, our developer tools, that was hyper motivating because we were like the catalyst that could make that possible. Because an application requires a computer and an application requires an operating system. And so all these applications that were being created with our tools were had this multiplier effect across the industry. And so for us, that was very exciting. We literally felt like we were changing the world, and for better. I mean, we had so many customer stories and so many customer experiences where they would show us, that like the app that was, curing cancer, or one that was, like running a nuclear plant. There were just so many different ways that these applications were being used, all to help businesses grow or help people, do their jobs better, or literally to help, medicine advance. And so it was just exciting. Every day was exciting. Because Microsoft programmers are so smart and, like we're, bare metal kind of people, and tended to think of themselves as the customer for Microsoft developer tools, we sort of got over-indexed on like the very high-end developer. But when you started going on the road, you realized that our developers were unique and were, not representative of the larger industry. And not only that, we also realized that developer tools had specific functionality that was good for some things, but not necessarily for other things. What we began to see was a customer who was using multiple tools and using the tools that fit the job versus what they knew. And so we realized we could make that easier. We can make that a lot easier if we had a shared editor, if we had a shared IDE, if we had a shared debugger. And so honestly, our first version of Visual Studio, we just threw everything in the box and called it Visual Studio, and it wasn't integrated very well. And so over time, it became, more and more integrated. And at first, of course, people were skeptical. They're like, oh, I'm a C++ programmer. I'm a Visual Basic programmer. But we knew that that wasn't true, that developers use the right tool for the right job. When I first joined Microsoft, I think from my first day, I thought, gosh, I'm home. It felt so comfortable to me from day one. There were so many great things about the culture, but I'll tell you one story that cemented my loyalty to Microsoft. At the time, there was a company called Borland, and they were kind of kicking us around quite a bit. They were more focused on their developer tools. They were doing better tools, arguably better tools than us. And so I remember all of us getting into a room. And when I say all of us, it was a group of us. And at the time, we called it a war room. We wouldn't probably call that anymore. But we had a war room. And it was, how are we going to exponentially improve our tools and our experience so that we win the hearts and minds of every developer? And I just remember sitting in that room and feeling the bond we all had with each other, and we were all united on this one problem and solving it for customers. And again, winning the hearts and minds of developers. Like, what's a better manifesto than that? And I knew we could do it because we were Microsoft. We had the resources and we had the credibility to pull it off. And of course, we had the IQ, we had the brains. And so we went out and we solved that problem and did win the hearts and minds of developers. I worked on developer tools where we didn't have a big budget. We were kind of the underdogs. And a lot of times we couldn't even really use all of the corporate infrastructure because it didn't really apply to us. So we sort of had to break some rules a little bit. So I started a party called the Geek Fest. And the goal of the Geek Fest was to be, sort of the illegal underbelly, and the motto of it was cheap beer, lousy pizza, and I used to see how cheaply I could do the party. But it was, like I'd order pizza or even make it myself sometimes. And we'd make T-shirts in my garage. I mean, everything about it was sort of, underground and illegal. And what was fun about it is that, the developers really are the backbone of the industry, but they're often left out of like the cool parties and the nicer things. And so that was what the Geek Fest was about. It was like, hey, we're the backbone of the industry. And so everybody was invited. The thing that I miss most about no longer working at Microsoft is the corporate matching. I miss that so much because what I love about Microsoft is the giving campaign was something for as long as I was there, and it was emphasized like crazy, not in a gross way, like if you don't give, you won't get promoted, but like we can take our corporate might and we can exponentially help our world be a better place. I set up a corporate computer lab back in the 90s for my high school using the giving campaign and the corporate match. I was able to fully outfit a computer lab with all of the software and give the students of my high school a leg up that, I didn't have when I was there. It was just so exciting and so great. I mean, the thing about Microsoft is changing the world didn't just start with software and what we were doing with, our business, but it went all the way to our DNA, where everything we did, we were able to grow our communities and grow the organizations that we believed most in. And so that, to me, I mean, I had felt a lot of responsibility prior to Microsoft, but what Microsoft helped me to do was turn that into action. Like, I was able to learn how to give in ways that that my tiny little brain before that could never comprehend. Like, if you had told me when I was in high school that I would be able to outfit a full computer lab, I would never have believed that I was capable of that. But Microsoft taught me how to have impact. And that's the single greatest thing I think I got from Microsoft. What I love about Microsoft is that there's this growth mindset where Microsoft is always learning and always wanting to learn. And I think in the DNA of Microsoft is still that passion for technology. And so because of that, I see a bright future for Microsoft, always wanting to find that next thing, obviously living in the moment and making sure doing a great job and meeting the customer need now, but definitely looking out to the future and making those investments and, again, having that growth mindset to be able to, take advantage of the next revolution. What I loved about my time at Microsoft is if you had a cool idea, you could generally get a little bit of money and a little bit of, mojo and do it. And, you had Visual Basic, so you could actually write the program too. So it was fun because there was just this whole you could kind of do anything. There was no barriers to whatever you wanted to do. Looking back on my career at Microsoft, the thing I'm most proud of is the developer advocacy that we set up and kind of the developer playbook. Like, we're the ones, I feel like, who made developers popular and made them important. A fun time at Microsoft was when the internet came to be, which is funny because if you're young, you're like, what? There was never an internet? What is that about? But back when the internet kind of became a thing, .NET was born out of that desire to, have developer tools for the internet. And so along came .NET. My main memory about .NET is, here's the deal. Visual Basic, we had this massive community of millions of Visual Basic applications, and we did not want to leave them behind. I'm forgetting all of my various operating systems, but they're Windows apps. They're not going to run on .NET. And Tom Button, who is a genius, he realized he doesn't want to leave them behind. And he's one of those guys who believes with every fiber of his being that if you ask something like, do you want, market share, or do you want low price, or he says yes to all of them. And so what he said, he challenged a couple of us and said, we need to figure out how to get those applications to .NET. And so a few of us traveled all over the world to find a migration tool. And we went to Costa Rica and met these guys, these computer science PhDs, who figured out semantic pattern matching. And long story short, we took that product that they made and put it into Visual Studio, and we were able to transform millions and millions of those Visual Basic applications to .NET. That was my main memory of, like, when, again, Microsoft always taught me that there's no such thing as limitations. And that was one of those times where, we could have left those customers, those millions of customers behind, but no, we brought them all with us and then helped them to, get to that next level on .NET.